Net1 has gone on the offensive and initiated a lawsuit against AllPay, claiming that AllPay wrongfully and unlawfully infringed its goodwill and reduced its share price by, amongst others, making false reports implying that its award of the Social Security tender was corrupt. It's claiming damages of 478 million rand, and joining me now is AllPay's legal representative, Anthony Norton of Nortons Incorporated. Anthony, thanks very much for coming through.
Pleasure.
What do you make of this lawsuit that they've initiated against you?
We think it's spurious. We don't think it has any legal or factual basis, and we will obviously defend it. AllPay will defend it vigorously.
Well, let's look at some of the claims that they've made. They say that AllPay directly or indirectly made false reports and provided false information to members of the media, claiming, basically implying that the whole tender process was corrupt. Has that at any point happened?
No. I think, as you'll appreciate, the media is an independent body. They write their own stories, they do their own investigations, and we certainly, AllPay certainly hasn't had any influence on that process.
What about the claim here that AllPay caused an unfounded report to be made to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange regarding disclosure that Net1 made in relation to the SASSA contract, and also making a report to the US Department of Justice, bringing to the attention of the Department of Justice the corruption allegations and the media reports against it?
I think I'd like to place this in some context, because I think most people don't understand how the legal framework around this operates. In terms of South African corruption legislation, there is a legal duty on any individual who has a reasonable suspicion of impropriety to report that. And that is a legal obligation which, if one doesn't discharge that obligation, that is penalizable as a criminal offence. So all that AllPay has done in this particular matter is acted in accordance with its legal obligations under the South African corruption legislation, and it's discharged that legal obligation. And I think we need to understand that that's a legal obligation which it was bound to discharge. As far as the JSE is concerned, I think AllPay was concerned about certain SENS announcements that were put out by Net1 which it believed were misleading, and a complaint was filed with the JSE in that regard.
Anthony, for those who maybe aren't that familiar with the background to, I suppose, the latest development in this spat, how did it all start and come about?
Well, this all related to an award of the social grants tender earlier this year to CPS, which is a subsidiary of Net1. My client AllPay believed that process in awarding the tender was fundamentally flawed, and brought a review application before the High Court. The High Court in Pretoria found that the tender process was illegal and invalid, but elected not to set aside the award of the tender.
Which of course they decided to do because they said that the payment of social grants to some 10 or 12 million South Africans would be affected if they declared the award null and prevented Net1 from going ahead with providing those services.
Yes, I think the court was concerned about the practical ramifications if it was to set aside the award of the tender, and therefore elected not to do so. Our client has appealed that particular aspect of the decision, and the Supreme Court will hear the matter in February next year in relation to our appeal and to the appeal which CPS has filed as well.
Did you find it a bizarre judgment that even declaring the tender award illegal and invalid, they said it could go ahead?
Well, I think it's a matter of public record as far as our appeal in Bloemfontein is concerned, that we believe that the correct decision would be to set aside the award of the tender, subject to a process which will ensure that there is no disruption to the payment of social grants to the needy. And what we have proposed is that a new tender process should commence within 6 months of the decision, and that the current process should remain in place until that new tender process has been determined, in order to avoid any disruption of the payment of social grants.
Could the US Department of Justice investigation into cash paymaster services have a very disruptive effect? Could they throw a huge spanner in the works?
Look, it's very difficult to predict what the outcome of that investigation would be, and I don't think I'm really in a position at this point to know in any respect how that investigation is ultimately going to pan out. So I think it's very difficult to say at this stage where that will ultimately lead.
So now, going back to today's lawsuit that Net1 has brought against AllPay, I imagine that you're going to defend it pretty vigorously.
Yes, I think AllPay will certainly defend this matter. We don't think that it has any legal merit whatsoever, and we will deal with it in the normal course.
Okay. Anthony, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. That's Anthony Norton from Nortons Incorporated.